All right, so you guys can call me John for now. It's fine. And I'm here, I'm going to talk about the link between can and should. So, well, I'm not going to say more about that. I got a whole thing here, so let's just do that. So just as an overview, I'm going to try to do a couple things in this talk, and then hopefully it won't take too long, so we'll have lots of time for Q&A, because I think the best way to do philosophy is just to participate in it. So hopefully you'll have questions and I'll be able to answer them, or you'll have some meaningful discussions amongst yourselves, since there are so many of you. But here's the plan. Okay, so there are, in fact, live, viable theories that inform us how we should act, even though there are a countless number of ways we can act. So a lot of people hold a view that there's not really an important relationship between the way we can act and the way we should act. But I think that's misguided, and philosophy informs us about this. So I'm going to talk about that. We're going to explore this link between can and should by considering some examples. So I'm just going to give us kind of 3 organizing questions. Well, there's the 4th one, which I hid in the end, so you'll see there's actually 4. A few simple but probably false theories. Okay, so those people who know me know that that's funny. The rest of you are going to be like, why would we talk about false theories? Well, the simple answer is because false theories are really easy to explain, and I just want to give you guys a feel for how these questions progress, not what the sort of current answer is. That would take way too long. And then lastly, I want to just defeat some common skeptical arguments. So the basic point of this talk is just to try and convince you that there is an actual link between the things you can do, and there's a long list of those things you could be doing right now. And then this idea that there are at least some things you should do. And lastly, the hidden message in here, I'm going to try to build a partial case for a thing known as moral realism, which is the idea that there is, in fact, a set of principles that are not merely dependent on opinions, feelings, cultures, or even just mere personal belief. That morality is a real thing, the same way something like atoms or gravity is a real thing. So obviously I won't have time to flesh out that whole case, but I'm just going to give you guys a feel for how that works, and then you guys can ask me about it at the end. Okay, so here's an initial problem with this question. You know, just because we can, should we? I mean, isn't the answer just obviously no? Like, when you read that, weren't you like, no? I mean, just consider something that you could do that would just be monstrously selfish. Just, you're going to go to Vegas, you're super stoked for it, you're like, yeah, Vegas! And you just are like, you know, screw you, little poochie, I'm out. You fend for yourself. I mean, I can do that. There's just no question that I could just leave my poor dog with no food or no one to look after him. But I shouldn't do that. So just as an initial problem then, isn't the answer just no? I mean, but isn't it worse than that? At least sometimes there are things that I can do that I should. So imagine I'm really skilled in CPR and one of you passes out. Shouldn't I leap down into the crowd and start performing CPR? I mean, one thinks I should. No cost to me, really, other than my lecture is ruined by your poor cardiac arrest. But otherwise, it seems like I should do that. And then lastly, it seems at least sometimes I should be selfish. I can do some things, but I should say no. I mean, I can't be everything to everyone. So at least sometimes I should be selfish. Now this raises these questions. I mean, this seems like this hopeless puzzle. How could I ever decide what I should do? I mean, it doesn't even make sense. I can do this, but I shouldn't. I can do that, but I should. I can do this, but there's no obligation whatsoever. It's just a huge mess. And this leads people to have this feeling that, look, just do whatever you want. It's such a big mess. It's up to you. Just decide what you want to do. And that's a common feeling people have about this, or maybe that feeling is pretty common to you. I don't know. Okay, look, so philosophy has some things to say about this. Let's get to the chase here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So there are some important ways in which philosophic thought can help us avoid this despair, this idea that it's just up to you. It's just such a mess. No one can decide anything. My parents say I should do this. My significant other says I should do that. I feel like I should do this third thing. Just no hope at all. So what can philosophy offer? Well, there's sort of 3 things that philosophy can offer in connecting these ideas of what I can do and what I should do. The first one, and this is a very common philosophic move, is just to provide some distinctions. Look, you know, calm down. We just have to think about should in a bunch of ways, and then this will start to flesh itself out a little bit. Second thing is, philosophy, for whatever reason, is the discipline that has been tasked with providing us with moral theories. So we can provide concepts, theories, logic, and things like that to help us connect these ideas of what I can do and what I should do. And then lastly, philosophy provides us with the tools for evaluating these theories. So you might think that's a little bit odd. They make up the theories and then they check them themselves. But that's what scientists do, right? Biologists make up biology and then they test it. No one thinks that's bad. So I think we'll be okay. So philosophy gives us these three things, and these are the things I'm going to talk about a little bit today. The last one I'm going to just try to give you guys a feel for how that works, since we won't have time to talk about epistemology, sadly. Okay, so here are my three questions. There's a fourth one, like I said, but it's coming later. Okay, look, I can go to college, but should I? And that seems like a question you've all asked yourselves. Obviously, you've all affirmed that you should do that, even if it's just for you. I can steal candy from a baby. It's not like really a problem. Babies, like, it's not a problem to take candy from a baby, but should I? And then lastly, look, I can jump on a grenade to save my platoon or my friends, I guess. Under some description I can, but should I? So these questions are going to help us think about this. So here's the first thing I want to do. Like I said last time, or in the slide earlier, there are some distinctions that matter. So these three questions drive a wedge between what's good for me, that is what makes my life go better, and what it seems I should do. So I can go to college, and if going to college would substantially improve my life, then it seems like I should do it. But if it wouldn't benefit me in any way, and it wouldn't improve my life, and wouldn't add to anyone's life for that matter, then I shouldn't. That makes sense. So it seems like you can answer that question either way depending on your circumstance. Certainly, I believe that candy makes my life better. I mean, come on, look at me. Candy, it's awesome. Okay, so I can steal candy from a baby, but just as certainly, I shouldn't take it from the baby. So even if candy makes my life go better, I shouldn't steal it, and certainly shouldn't steal it from a baby. And then being blown up by a grenade is not the kind of thing that makes my life go better. That doesn't sound right. It doesn't make my life better. It clearly doesn't. Even if it just ends my life, it's not going to make it better, that's for sure. So the problem here is that in this last case, at least some of us have the intuition that it would be morally good if I were to save my brothers and sisters in arms. That would be something I should do, morally speaking. Even if I can't compel myself to do it, lots of people think, well, if I were going to put a list of things you should do, Coolidge, when the grenade lands there, one of them is you should dive on it. Now, maybe you're not going to, but at least I think you should. So this idea here is that there's a distinction between two things. Philosophers consider these two different notions of should. That is, there's a prudential should, and those are described what are called value theories. And those are theories about how I should behave relative to what will make my life better. So those are the kinds of questions like, should I go to college? That seems like a value question. It's not a question of values the way we talk about it in normal parlance, but a question of what makes my life better, what gives my life value, makes it worthwhile. So that's the first set of theories. I'm going to talk about those a little bit. And then the second set of theories are moral shoulds. So should is ambiguous between the moral case and the value case. And moral theories focus on these. So these theories focus on our understanding what obligations we have as agents. So agents are people who make choices, and we're all agents, at least under most descriptions. And so a lot of these theories are organized around the idea that well-being, whether it's mine or others, informs me how I should behave. So you might think going to college, I would make my mom happy if I went, and I'll be able to benefit society. And so in effect, there's all these consequences that spill out beyond me. And that's why I should go to college. It's not merely selfish, but also because it'll benefit people. And then there's a second set of theories that suggest that there's some moral obligations we just have, simpliciter. Either way, we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about these two kinds of theories, but those make up the two big categories of moral theories. Some focus on what changes you have in well-being, and the other ones focus on being a special kind of agent, whether it's being a rational human being or social animal or what have you. All right. So let's talk a little bit about value theory. So in Plato's Apology, which is a fairly famous reading in philosophy, Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, that seems like a bit of an overstatement. It seems like an unexamined life might be worth living. I can imagine a few people, Paris perhaps, whose life would go well regardless of whether she thought about what was good for her or not. It's going to be fine. She's going to have a good life. But most people, I take it, think that what Socrates was really after was this idea that unless you have some tools or skills for examining what will make your life go better, it would just be luck if your life went well. Mere chance. And since most of us are not set up with the resources of, say, Paris Hilton to provide us with a healthy safety net when we make bad decisions for our lives, we have to care about that. So what Socrates seems like he was really driving at here is that without a value theory, it's just mere chance that I live a good life. Don't I want to do better than that? And so if we can come up with these value theories that inform us about how we should behave, at least prudentially, that means what's best for me, then I'm going to be at a huge loss relative to having a good life. I very strongly desire to ask you if you're following me. How many people think they're following so far? Just nod. Oh, good job in the front. You guys in the back think I can't see you, but I can. All right. Okay, so there's a prudential puzzle here, I think. There are many lives I could lead, lots of good lives I could have. There's lots of good ways for me to be in the world and so on. And there are many actions I can take, but only some subset of those actions are the ones I should take for me. So how can I think about this? And in fact, how can I know which action I should take, even if it's just a prudential should? And remember, that's the should for me, what makes my life better. So here's a suggestion. So one fairly common theory, it's called desire satisfaction theory, or preference maximization theory. And it's been championed by philosophers and economists and lots of other people. So this isn't just a weird thing that Koolage thought up in his bed last night. This is a real theory. It's been around for a long time. And just as a note for anyone who happens to take my future class, I don't like this theory at all. In fact, I really actually hate it. But it's a very nice theory. It's easy to understand. And it helps you understand the idea that there's at least something you should do for you. That is, from all the things you think you could do, it's not just a matter of tossing a coin or picking the one you happen to like the most that day. There's an actual theory that informs us about this. And this theory is called desire satisfaction theory. All right, and so this is the theory. That's it right there, one sentence. You might think a single sentence theory isn't very good, but that's very parsimonious, and who doesn't love parsimony? So that's just Occam's razor for you there, Tom. You like that one? Yeah, okay. All right. So all and only the satisfaction of desires makes one's life go better. Now that sounds puzzling at first, but the idea here is something like, look, I have a bunch of desires, things I want from my life, and those are the things I should pursue. And if I actually succeed in achieving the things I desire, then my life has gone better. If I fail, it has gone worse. So if I want something like $500 in my bank account, and there are $500 in my bank account, then my life is going better. This is a pretty general theory. It's good because it allows for lots of different lives. Your good life could be different from mine. But it provides an important organizing feature. So let's go back to one of our questions. I can get a college degree, but should I? Answering this question is super easy now that we have the desire satisfaction theory. It's not all scary, matter of opinion, totally unknown. In fact, it's well known. I should go to college if, A, I desire to go to college, and or B, if I have a set of desires that can be easily achieved by going to college. That's the best way for me to satisfy my desires. So it looks like I should say something like, I should not, and well, you can read the rest of that. So notice this theory suggests that there is something I should do that's not a matter of mere opinion. Even though my desires are feelings that I have, those are things that happen inside me, whether or not I should go to college is determined by whether or not that will be good for achieving my goals. And my goal achievement is something that happens outside of me, not in my head. So if I want $500 in my bank account, and I merely believe there are $500 in my bank account, I might think my life is going better, but it isn't. It's only going better if I have those $500. That's how the theory works. So here again, you can see that it's not a matter of mere opinion or simple emotion or something like that. So even though desires are emotions, this theory suggests what makes your life go better is something that happens beyond just your desires. That is, there's an objective fact. Someone else could just look at my list of desires or goals and look at the things I'm doing and decide pretty easily whether or not I'm satisfying my goals or desires. In fact, there's a whole branch of clinical psychology that works like this. Look, here are the things you want in your life. Here are the things you're doing. Those don't match up. That's bad for you. And that's exactly what this theory says. All right, so what about these ones? Look, I can steal candy from a baby, but should I? Look, candy satisfies my desire for candy, so stealing it would satisfy this desire. But yet, it still seems like I shouldn't steal candy from a baby. And then secondly, look, I can jump on a grenade to save my platoon, but should I? Here again, it looks like this isn't a prudential should. It's not what's good for me that's at issue. It's something else. So do people follow that? So it looks like should is divided into two questions. There's the questions about what's good for me. That's what I should do prudentially. And then there's this other question hiding here. And this is what we call the moral should. So we need moral theory to answer this question about whether or not I should steal candy from a baby, because my value theory tells me I should. I desire it. It'll satisfy my desire. Check. That's good. But it seems like we don't want to say you should not do that. And then secondly, obviously jumping on the grenade, that's not better for me. All right, so we need a second theory of should. So we have one theory of should. It's the value theory, prudential theory. Second one, moral theory. OK, so let's go back to this question I asked earlier. So this is my fourth question that was hiding in here. Look, if I'm skilled in CPR and one of you starts having a heart attack or drops into cardiac arrest, then I should help you. That sounds right. In fact, we're pretty sure that is right. So let me just take a second to have a little digression here. I just want to mention this point that's all right there so you guys can read along. But the basic idea is just this. Look, there's an important difference between what I will do and what I should do. Look, one of you has a heart attack. Likely, I'm just going to faint. Or be perplexed, like, what's happening there? I'm so confused. But that doesn't undermine the idea that I still should help you. Does that make sense to people? So there's this difference between what I'm going to do and what I should do. Those are different things. And that's what importantly separates the philosophic question about what moral should is and this sort of simple psychological question, what do people actually do? So moral theory is not a question of psychology. It's about something different from that. It's about what we should do, not what we will do. And psychology is about what we will do. That makes at least some sense on the face of it. All right, so here's a theory, the Beneficence Principle, that suggests there is a moral theory behind all of this, and it's called the Beneficence Principle, not surprisingly. And it says this: look, if I can take some action X, where X is any action, say perform CPR, which will help someone without harming anyone, including myself, then I should take action X. Well, this theory says I morally should perform CPR. Okay, so all these people are like, well, there's no moral theories, there's no way of knowing what you should do. Here's a suggestion. Look, if you can benefit somebody, and there's no cost to anyone at all, wouldn't not doing that make you a giant asshole? Right, so look, it's not just a matter of opinion that this seems to work. It seems like it underwrites a moral obligation that I have. If there's no cost at all, and I don't do it, I'm doing something wrong or bad. So I should do it. That's the idea of the Beneficence Principle. Okay, so the Beneficence Principle is a nice first pass at providing us with a moral theory. It tells me what actions I should morally take if there's no costs. Of course, the Beneficence Principle is either false or incomplete. So consider our earlier question, I can jump on a grenade to save my platoon, but should I? It looks like the Beneficence Principle just has nothing to say about that. Since the Beneficence Principle is set up to say, if there's no cost at all, then you should do that. Since jumping on a grenade has a high cost, this theory doesn't apply. So the theory is either false or incomplete, depending on how you think about these theories. But it does provide us with a way of thinking about how morality might work. There are these sorts of principles, like the Beneficence Principle, and those are correct for predicting what we ought to do morally speaking. That is what we should do. But this one isn't good enough. It might be good enough for simple cases, but not good enough as a complete moral theory. All right, well, due to time constraints and the mere fact that I would like for all of you to have a chance to talk and say interesting things, I'm just going to jump ahead here. So look, there are some moral theories. We just don't have time to trot them all out and talk about them. That takes whole classes. In fact, virtually everything I've said so far, I'm pretty sure you could devote a class to. Like whole class, not one class period, but like hours of work. So I'm not going to talk any more about live moral theories. You can ask me at the end about that if you like. But for now, I'm just going to deal with what's called moral skepticism. So the third part of my talk tonight is to try and convince you that there are, in fact, moral principles. So I said there were, and I gave some examples of what you might think about them. Beneficence Principle gives us some shoulds. Desire satisfaction theory gives us some shoulds. But now I just want to defeat some fairly obvious things that are, some fairly obvious positions that fall under the heading moral skepticism. So as you can see, moral skepticism is a set of views that amounts to the idea that there's just no, and or there can be no, theory of morality. Thus, among the actions you can do, there's not any one you should do. In fact, that makes no sense. That's the view of moral skepticism. Or that's a fairly strong version of it, but that'll do for now. Okay, so there are three lines that get us to moral skepticism. There are, in fact, more than this, but these are the three main ones. The first thing people think is, look, Koolage, you said all these nice things about the Beneficence Principle, but don't people disagree about whether you should perform CPR? I mean, surely someone thinks you're wasting your time. They don't want you to do it. And so people think, look, disagreement among well-informed rational agents demonstrates there are no moral facts. And I'm just going to use this word moral fact to stand in for you morally should do X is true. That's what moral fact means. So look, some people think that you should fly airplanes into World Trade Centers, and other people think you shouldn't. And didn't both of those people think about it a lot? And since they thought about it so much, and they both came to different positions, there must be no fact of the matter. It's just a matter of their opinion. Some people happen to like flying planes in trade centers. Some people happen to not like it. That's all there is to it. So that's the first line of moral skepticism. People follow that idea? Just nod if yes. Oh, thank you. I'm just going to look at you in the back there. You're like nodding like big time. Yeah, that's good. Okay, number two, moral facts are like matters of taste. They're purely subjective. So this is the second line. Most people are familiar with this one. Okay, I'll save that until I get to it. Moral facts, finally, the third line, moral facts are really just matters of cultural etiquette. So they're conventions or merely rules about how people will treat you if you violate these norms that are purely set up by cultures. So look, whether I should perform CPR is entirely dependent on how American cultures view people who perform CPR. If the American culture is like, yes, then I should do that. If the American culture is like, meh, you know, whatever, which maybe it is, I don't know, then you should not, or you are not obligated. So that's the third line. So people follow, so three positions. First one is disagreement leads to no fact of the matter. Maybe some of you already see what's wrong with that. Second one is it's like matters of taste. It's just true for me that performing CPR is good. And then lastly, it's a matter of cultural etiquette. Our culture decides whether you get a thumbs up or thumbs down for anything you do. Okay, so these all get us to moral skepticism because they all suggest morality is not really a thing. It's either not a thing at all, disagreement, or it's a matter of taste. It's just your feeling about it that determines whether it's good or bad. And lastly, it's a matter of pure construction. That is, our society makes it up, and there's nothing more to it than that. Okay, so disagreement. This is the worst of the arguments. It's terrible. It's easy to see why this is terrible by just simply putting an analogy to sort of scientific cases. And there are lots and lots of these scientific cases, but here's today's favorite one. Consider the tectonic revolution. Okay, so the tectonic revolution is when people discovered that actually the continents move, and there's a manifold, and you guys are familiar with this, right? Okay, so Wegener, who's the guy who proposed this theory, proposed it around like 1912 or something like that. And he said, look, the continents are moving, and I have all this evidence. I've got these radio signals from Greenland. You can see the fossil records spread out. There's all this paleontological data that supports the idea that the continents have moved apart. And the physicists at the time are like, no, Wegener, you're a moron. Nothing can move a tectonic plate that is this big. There's no force powerful enough to move these plates around. Nothing could do that. Nothing. Okay, so look, I had to do it. I had the mic. So the physicists, they have physics behind them, Newtonian mechanics, they know about forces. There's nothing that can move a plate that big. Wegener, on the other hand, has all this evidence. It's like, look, there's this mountain range in Africa that's just continuous with the mountain range in South America. Just like when you were a kid, you're like, hey, those go together. Yeah, he's like got tons of evidence, and yet they disagree. 70 years they disagreed. Wegener actually died before his theory came to prominence. They disagreed, but not one of you thinks that the tectonic theory is just vacuous. There's nothing to it. These guys disagree, and they're rational, smart people. They have background theories they're using. But nobody thinks there's no fact of the matter. They don't think it's a matter of opinion, Wegener's opinion versus the physicist's opinion. The physicists lost this one. They lost. They were wrong. It's not just that their opinion got outweighed by lots of money and powerful people. They were wrong. People follow that idea? So here, the point I'm trying to make is just, why do we think that disagreement among rational agents shows there's no fact of the matter? We don't think that in any science whatsoever. Now, you might say, sure, Coolage, but moral things are different from scientific things. In science, they have proofs and facts and things like that. Well, look, I just want to challenge you here in this way. You don't get to presuppose there's no morality to make your argument. So ask yourself, why is it I think there are no moral facts in the case of disagreement about morality, but I think there are moral facts in the case of disagreement about science, without presupposing that morality is somehow dumb or misguided? That's a challenge. So you guys can think about that, and you can tell me at the end if you're interested. But disagreement doesn't show there's no fact of the matter. That's foolishness. What about subjectivism? So this is the second position. Look, chocolate ice cream is best. That's true for you. I think vanilla ice cream is best. Diving on a grenade is best is true for you, but I don't think so. So maybe morality is just like tastes, right? It's possible that the moral facts, there aren't any of those really. They're just sort of feelings you have. You were raised right by your mom or whatever, and so you've cultivated proper tastes about how to live life. But Coolage, you were raised by wolves in the backwoods of Canada, and so you don't care. All right, maybe it's like that. Okay, look, the problem with this is that we all know that believing, no matter how hard we believe, doesn't make it true. So here's the problem for subjectivism. Look, if morality or moral facts are really just relative to an individual's opinions or beliefs, well then you could never be wrong. You're morally infallible, because what makes it true that it's good to perform CPR or jump on a grenade is just that you believe it. That's all it takes. All you have to do is believe it or feel it or really passionately endorse it in your mind. That makes it true that you should do those things. That means you could never be wrong. If you want to be right about morality, all you have to do is believe it really hard. So I believe really hard that it's okay for me to steal candy from a baby, and it becomes okay to steal candy from a baby. It's just a matter of taste, like vanilla ice cream. If I try really hard, I can pretend I like chocolate ice cream best. Okay, so this is just foolish. This is foolishness again. How could this be right? How many of you woke up in the morning, put on your shoes, sat up and been like, oh, I can't believe I thought that was a good idea? All right, thank you, honest people. Look, if that ever happened to you, ever, then you are not a subjectivist. Why? Because when you thought that was right last night, it was right, and that made it right. Getting up in the morning, nothing changed. Hopefully. Nothing changed. You think it's wrong now. That's because something about you made you discover that it was wrong. You didn't just get up in the morning and change your mind for no reason at all. That's arbitrary. And you're not arbitrary. You're a reasoned, rational thinker. So if you've ever been wrong, you cannot be a subjectivist. So all the people who think it's just a matter of taste, they're confused. They've obviously never thought much about their experiences because you all have an experience of having been wrong. And this theory says you could never be wrong. All right. Cultural relativism. So the last line of our moral skepticism is what's called cultural relativism. So cultural relativism is the view that moral facts, of course there aren't any actual moral facts, but the idea of a moral fact is just a convention, just agreed upon by people. Well, so another way of putting that then is there are no culturally independent moral facts, and moral facts are merely matters of agreement among groups of people called cultures. So we all get together and we decide, hey, eating babies is wrong. All right, dude, I'm down. Culture instantiated. Now we have a moral rule, don't eat babies. Okay, before that, there was no moral rule, but there is one now that we have a culture, thank goodness. And so this is good. Okay, so this idea actually gained some popularity incorrectly because it's associated with a good principle of anthropology, which says shooting first at the savages is a bad way to find out about indigenous people, you imperialist pig dogs. All right, so look, anthropologists a long time ago learned that if you shoot the people you're trying to study because you think they're wrong, you'll never find anything out. So if you're a good scientist, you should stop shooting first and be like, hey, everybody take a pill and hang out with the indigenous people and figure out what they're about. That's a good idea. You should do that. That's a good epistemic principle, a matter of good science. However, that is not what cultural relativism says. What cultural relativism says is your moral principles are relative to your culture. What this says is if you want to find out about another culture, don't prejudge them. That's a good principle. Cultural relativism, on the other hand, suffers some problems. So there are three lines of challenge to the idea that's raised by cultural relativism, this kind of skepticism that they have. The first one is that the concept of culture seems ill-suited to ground moral beliefs, or moral truth for that matter. So look, even though I can completely well understand that, look, we could get together and decide killing babies is wrong, and that would make a good rule for us to follow, it just doesn't seem like that's the way in which morality operates. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Second, the standard reasons given in support of cultural relativism seems to be reasons for a different theory called moral realism. That is, most people, what they say is, look, cultural relativism is going to turn us into good people. If all we do is love our neighbors, then we'll be good. But I actually think there's a better theory for understanding why we would be good, better than cultural relativism, one that would make you tolerant, one that would make you a good person, but doesn't involve all the weirdness of cultural relativism. So I'm going to try to show that anything you want to say that's good for cultural relativism is also good for this other position called moral realism. All right, lastly, the sort of conventionalism found in cultural relativism seems at odds with reasonable epistemology. So that's a fancy way of saying, it looks like the way we find out about the world is not by sitting down together and agreeing how it is. We actually go out and look at it and find out some things. So I'm going to talk about that last. All right. So culture. So consider the American businesswoman who finds herself in a country where bribery is the norm. So in that culture, they think that you have to bribe people to get stuff done. She can't even get a meeting with the person her company sent her to see unless she bribes the secretaries and other people along the way. What should she do? Look, here in America, we think bribery is wrong, I think. Okay, I'm going to go with that. So look, bribery is wrong here in America, but look, she's in a country where bribery is okay. So what should she do? So I'm just going to ask you, anyone, what thoughts on this? What should she do? Bribe them, right. So like, when in Rome, behave as the Romans do, right? If she's in this other culture, then she should behave that way. Okay, but what if the norm is something like, look, you have to cannibalize your business partner before we'll have a meeting with you. And they do this, and somehow their culture survives. I don't really know how, but imagine it does. Now, should this poor businesswoman have to eat her business partner before she can get these meetings? Anyone want to go with yes? Yeah. Okay, here are skeptics up at the front. Okay, good. So most people think, no, she shouldn't have to eat them, and that it's not a matter of just sort of when in Rome do these things. So these people are called what are called culture transgressors, people who are members of more than one culture. And this is a huge problem in our global world, right? Because we belong to lots of cultures. So deeper down in this problem is this idea that cultural relativism doesn't really tell us how to deal with things like subcultures or multicultures or anything like that. It just tells us that we should look at the culture and that's where the rules come from. But it doesn't inform us which rules or which cultures or so on. And so if one of the relatively famous philosophers, if any philosopher is famous, Russ Schaefer Landau asks us to consider Luca Brassi's enforcement for the Corleone family. So anyone who's seen The Godfather, Luca Brassi's he's the hitman essentially. And he gets sent out by the Corleones to kill people. So he goes and he kills someone. Is that good or bad? I mean, this is hard to see. I mean, he's doing what his family is telling him to do, so according to the conventions of the Corleone family, this is exactly what he should do. In fact, not doing it would make him a horrible person. However, according to the conventions of the rest of America, killing people is bad. So it looks like poor Luca's in this completely conflicted state the same way our businesswoman is. And so this causes some problems for cultural relativism because the idea of culture is not pinpointed. It's not precise enough to tell us how to behave. People follow that idea. So culture is a really good idea if you want to predict certain kinds of behaviors or phenomena, like economic behavior and stuff like this. Culture is an important concept for that, but it just doesn't seem to do the work when we want to talk about morality. It doesn't seem like the right concept for this. That's argument one. So since the basic idea is that moral facts are dependent on culture, that's in conflict with this idea that we have high moral ground. Right? So some people think, look, in a conflict, in a war, or something like that, one side is the moral superior to the other. One has got in the right, the just war. But if cultural relativism is true, that can never be. Every culture is equally good. So it's just a disagreement among them. So look, we head on over to liberate the Iraqis from their horrible dictator. We think we're doing the right thing. But he doesn't, and none of his minions do. Isn't that a culture which has some standing here? So do we have the high moral ground in this conflict or not? Well, if cultural relativism is right, you can't have a high moral ground because everybody's on equal moral footing. That just seems like that's misguided and out of place. It doesn't seem to capture what we mean when we say morally should. Okay, so why be a relativist? I mean, there are some virtues of cultural relativism. I mean, obviously people who hold this view aren't dumb. Although most of them, I think, are just confused between good scientific principles, that is the anthropological principles, and moral principles. Those are different things. But here's some things. I mean, look, it explains a bunch of things we want it to explain, and it supports certain attitudes we consider morally efficacious. So I'm just going to say what that means. Look, people think that if you're a cultural relativist, you'll be tolerant. That's important, right? I mean, we should be tolerant of other cultures. And if cultural relativism is right, every culture is equally good, so I should be tolerant of them. And what it means to be tolerant is, look, I think you're wrong, but I'm going to let it slide. That's what it is to be tolerant. It's different from being accepting. Accepting means I'm going to accept your principles. That means I agree with them in some way. But tolerance is different from that. It's saying, no, I actually think you're wrong, but it's okay that you're wrong. That's tolerance. And it's different from patience, where patience is, well, I'm just going to wait until you see the correct view, so I'm just going to we'll let it go for now. That's called patience, and that's not the same. So that's what tolerance is. So ask yourself, can cultural relativism actually explain tolerance and thus support the idea that we should be tolerant? And I think the answer here is obviously no, and this is a little bit technical, so I'll just try to get through it about that. So look, if cultural relativism is correct, then all moral facts are set by your culture. So let's say culture A holds that eating shrimp is good. Shrimp. And culture B holds that eating shrimp is wrong. Okay, everybody good with that? What that means then is that in culture A, or eating shrimp is good in culture A, and eating shrimp is wrong in culture B. So just think of a simple case. Can culture A actually tolerate culture B's behavior? Remember, tolerating means thinking they're wrong, but letting it slide. Well, it doesn't seem like you can actually do that. I mean, here's what it amounts to. I think culture B is wrong in their view about shrimp, but I'll let it slide. What that means then is we in culture A think culture B is wrong about eating shrimp being wrong in culture B, but we'll let it slide. But that doesn't make any sense. They're not wrong about that. They're right that eating shrimp is wrong in culture B, for culture B. So culture A can't actually tolerate this thing. It's impossible to be tolerant on this view. That's shocking, I think. Here's a little piece of philosophic trickery or chicanery, perhaps, but they just can't explain tolerance. So all the cultural relativists of the world who are like, look, you imperialist pig dogs, if you were just tolerant, that is, if you were a relativist like me, you would be tolerant. It's actually impossible to be tolerant. What tolerance means is you think they're wrong, but they aren't wrong. They can't be wrong about their own view. It's their view. And so tolerance is actually not supported by this. So it's actually easier to explain tolerance, like I said I was going to do, if you're a moral realist. That is, if you think there's a true set of moral principles, it's actually easier. Because if one of the principles that's correct, which we all happen to think, is that you should be tolerant, then moral realism says one of the things you should do, no matter who you are, no matter what culture you belong to, is be tolerant. That's better, isn't it? I mean, look, imagine you belong to a really intolerant culture, like the Nazis. Are you going to be tolerant? Did he say Nazis? Did he automatically lose this fight? I haven't said Hitler yet. Okay, look, imagine you belong to a really intolerant culture. There are a lot of these cultures, just for the record. Nazis is just an easy example. So before anyone thinks I'm picking on Nazis, I'm not picking on Nazis. Anyone could belong to an intolerant culture. Lots of cultures are intolerant. Well then, what's the correct moral principle for you? You should be intolerant. You belong to a culture that's intolerant. You should be intolerant. That's what cultural relativism says. That's ridiculous. I think we should endorse instead moral realism, which says, look, you should be tolerant. No matter who you are. No matter what your culture says. That seems better, doesn't it? High voice and inflection aside, that sounds right to me. You think about it. All right, lastly, this bit of constructivism that appears in cultural relativism, it says that morality is a convention. It's a matter of agreement. We all get together and decide that eating babies is wrong. That's why it's wrong. There's nothing else to the story. Surely some things are just conventions. Look, our speed limits, they seem like just conventions. You should go 35 here. Well, why not 36 or 37 or 42? I mean, come on. We just picked that number. We all got together in a big room and said 35 will do. Done. That's a convention. Okay, good. But should we think that moral facts are mere conventions, just like these things like speed limits? Well, one reason we might believe that moral facts are just a matter of convention is because, look, we express moral facts in the language of our culture. That is, we use English to talk about these things. That belongs to my culture. Without my culture, I wouldn't have the language that I do. Even my subculture determines what kind of way I talk about things. So I need to talk about things in some way, and my culture decides that. Secondly, some of these moral facts are passed down to me by my parents or other people. You know, my teachers with the ruler or whatever. Shh, Coolage, no. Oh, I shouldn't do that. Okay. So at least some things are passed down in this way. And lastly, it seems like we just disagree sometimes about what the moral facts are. And if some sort of conventionalism is true, somebody wasn't on board with the convention. They're like, I didn't like that convention. I didn't want to vote for that. I'm going to opt out. So I'm going to try to undermine this set of reasons for believing cultural relativism by comparing them to another case, the case of seeing. So you're going to see why this is an odd analogy in just a moment, but try this. Okay, here's a thought experiment. So we're just going to go through all the ways philosophy can deal with things. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine a cave person is awoken from their deep slumber, and they're walking down the street and they see a tennis ball. We all think they see the tennis ball, right? They're not, they could pick it up, they could throw it, they could try to eat it. Everybody's familiar with this, right? They have no word for tennis ball. They didn't play tennis ball in the Precambrian or whenever cave people lived. They didn't play tennis. So they don't see that it's a tennis ball. They don't have the concepts of tennis. They don't have the concepts of fuzzy green ball. But they surely see the fuzzy green ball. People following me on this? Anyone want to disagree with that before we move on? I mean, they see the tennis ball, even though they don't see that it is a tennis ball. All right, so why does this matter for cultural relativism? So a little digression there. Well, the realist can recognize the difference between seeing and seeing that and draw the same kind of distinction in the moral case. Look, I might need a culture to provide me with concepts and language to express that X is wrong. I might need English to say things like eating babies is wrong. Or I might even need a culture to help convey that idea to other people. I need a culture for that. But it looks like that's what it means to be seeing that, right? So to explain that I see that it's a tennis ball, I need English, and I need a culture, and I need all these things. But I can still see the tennis ball. Couldn't there be moral facts underneath the way in which I talk about it? That is, I can still have some important experience of moral facts, even if I have to have a culture in order to express it or propagate my knowledge about it. That is, I can drive a distinction here between the actual moral facts and the way we talk about them. Cultural relativism supposes that the way we talk about them is the only way that there are things that are called moral facts. Realism, on the other hand, says that there's the same distinction between seeing and seeing that as there is between being good and seeing that it's good. And so it looks like they can just say, look, sometimes I'm wrong about the moral facts, sometimes some cultures are mistaken about it. The same way somebody might have a poor theory of tennis or not understand what a tennis ball is. They can be mistaken about that, but there still is a tennis ball. Somebody could be in a situation where they falsely express the moral facts. They fail to talk about them correctly, they don't seem to understand them right, and yet there still is a moral fact. So if there is a moral reality that we need theories to get in touch with, and those theories are given to us and propagated by our cultures, well then again, we'll express moral facts thanks to theories generated by cultural processes, so I need a culture. I need to be taught these theories, or at least parts of them, by other people, like my parents and so on. Same way cultural relativists think we get moral facts. And then lastly, moral facts are sensitive to cultural teachings in this way, and so we could have intercultural disagreement about them. That is, if I belong to this subculture, I'm going to get exposed to a different set of moral facts than you. And we could both be wrong, or I could be wrong, or you could be wrong. But I'm still getting exposed to those in this way. So cultural relativism doesn't have any edge on providing us an account of morality, right? So even though I think we need a culture to be able to talk about these things, to be able to propagate knowledge about these things, and we need to be taught these theories by someone, and I think that we have intercultural disagreement about these facts, I don't think that's not sufficiently explained by cultural relativism. Why? Because moral realism explains all those same facts. So another way of putting that is, all the things that make you believe in cultural relativism are the exact same things that would make you believe moral realism. So that's where I'm at right now. People feel like they followed that idea. So there's these things that make us believe there's these things that make us believe cultural relativism, but those things are exactly expressible by the moral realist so long as there's a distinction between seeing and seeing that, or being good and believing that it's good. So long as we have that distinction, I can explain all the same things. But it gets worse. Moral realism has an edge over cultural relativism. Cultural relativism says it can explain these facts. But here are some additional facts that moral realism explains that cultural relativism cannot. At least sometimes, I think I find out about the world by being in it, not being told about it. So that's true of tennis balls and a variety of other things. I feel like I discover things by being in the world and not being told about the world. Okay, people follow this idea? So if you ever think you've kind of come to some interesting new thing about, like, oh, it is wrong to do that, or it is good to do this, and no one ever said it to you, that's impossible if you're a cultural relativist. But it looks like that happens to us all the time. By being a person in the world, I can find out new things. And moral realism explains that. Why? Because there are real moral things that you can find out about. And then secondly, it looks like moral realism lends itself to some other explanations of why we are why moral reality exists. So it might be able to inform us about innate biologic things. So some facts about us as biologic entities. Maybe some of our morality is underpinned by the fact we were selected in a certain way. It also seems to say that the way I'm built psychologically might matter. So the investigation of how the world is by psychology, by biology, and by all these other things can help inform morality if we're moral realists. If we're cultural relativists, those can't inform us. They can just merely be part of our cultural beliefs. We can't discover anything. We can just agree to it. So cultural relativism seems impoverished relative to the realist view. Relativism just can't explain as much as realism does. Unfortunately, these are all R words, and I'm getting tired. So, conclusion, before you guys get to play. So I'm just going to go through a couple things. Look, I made some distinctions at the beginning, and I said distinctions can help us. Look, we feel hopelessly lost. When it looks like a huge mess, everybody gives up. But distinctions, like the distinctions between prudential shoulds and moral shoulds, that distinction allows us to start feeling a little bit happier about how things are. That is, we can see that there's a difference between them, and that's why we have these conflicting results. I talked about a couple theories, desire satisfaction theory and the beneficence principle, and those are just aimed to give you a feel for how we might build a theory. Those are obviously incomplete theories. There's interesting problems with them. But at least they show us that we can make up concepts that connect to how we think the world is, morally speaking. Lastly, man, I can't believe I said that. Okay, so theories connect, can, and should, and they can be evaluated by the tools of philosophy. So I talked about some ways we can do this, or rather I just demonstrated them. For example, I tried to show that realism is a better explanation of our moral beliefs than relativism is. So that's a philosophic tool that we can use. And given more time, I might spend some time trying to convince you that we can treat moral theories the same way we treat scientific theories. Not that moral theory is a scientific theory, but it's evaluated in exactly the same way. So if you think our theory of biology is good, well then you should probably think our theories of morality are good in the same way. Not because they're both scientific theories, one's a scientific theory and the other's a moral theory, but because they're evaluated in exactly the same way. The tools we use to do that are the same. And I would try to convince you of that if we had more time. And lastly, I presented moral realism as a viable alternative to skepticism. So I more or less just told you that it was and made a short case for that. But there you go. All right.